Imagine telling someone in 1986, when Cadillac was selling a Cimarron, aka a Chevy Cavalier with some leather and a family crest, that one day Cadillac would line up on the Formula One grid next to the likes of Mercedes, Ferrari, or Aston Martin. People would have laughed you out of the room, and that's because Cadillac's story is kinda messy. It's a story of old world pre-war opulence, followed by decades of economically inflicted identity crisis, followed by a complete 180 that results in their entry in the highest tier of open wheel racing. So today, Cadillac isn't just sponsoring a Formula One team, they're in Formula One, starting next month. So how did a brand that went from pushing the boundaries of internal combustion and automotive luxury to badge engineered embarrassment to redemption through the most grueling form of motorsport end up in Formula One? I feel like we need to rewind all the way back to the part that people don't really know about. Cadillac only exists because Henry Ford left.
Hi guys, I'm Shmi and you're watching Vinstagram.
Pseudo luxury purgatory. If you've been watching my videos as of late, you might be used to me using that term when referring to the state of certain automotive companies, but I've never quite defined it. Pseudo luxury purgatory is this weird middle ground that car makers end up in when trying to elevate their current brand or their new sub-brand into the luxury segment. Unfortunately for these brands, that's not quite how the general public sees it, often for good reason. And up until recently, that's largely how the world's seen Cadillac, but it wasn't always like that. Before Cadillac was Cadillac, it was the Henry Ford Company, Ford's second attempt at building cars. It didn't last because Ford found himself clashing with investors and he ended up walking away in 1902. But then an engineer by the name of Henry Leland steps in, convinces Ford's backers not to liquidate, and reorganizes the company into a new brand honoring Detroit's founder, Antoine de la Marque de Cadillac, or Cadillac. While Henry Ford's new company, which is the modern Ford Motor Company that we know today, focused on mass production, Cadillac became obsessed with interchangeability and customization, and that obsession became Cadillac's early superpower. This meant that early models, the Tonneau and the Runabout, which were really Ford Model A's with Leland's proven single-piston engine, could have things like an extra row of seats or rear entry so you could park the car perpendicular to the street and passengers could enter from the back as to not have to walk in the mud right off the curb. In 1908, Cadillac famously demonstrates their interchangeable parts to the world and wins the DeWar Trophy, which was a big deal at the time. They were amongst the likes of Daimler and Rolls-Royce, and that's where the standard of the world reputation gets cemented. So from the beginning, Cadillac's identity wasn't big chrome pseudo luxury boat. It was configurability and customization amidst the sea of manufacturers who were still finding their way around the idea of creating a horseless carriage in the first place. If you're a real car enthusiast, you probably have some sort of idea of what pre-war luxury vehicles look like. You have a certain silhouette in mind that simply doesn't exist in the modern automotive industry. Luxury brands embrace the grandiose required to meet the standards of their customers. They were basically luxury stagecoaches, but now instead of horses, they just power themselves. And Cadillac, amongst icons such as Rolls-Royce, Maybach, Packard, Duesenberg, Mulliner, Park Ward, and Bugatti, were major players in shaping what that looked like. I don't think you guys are picking up what I'm putting down here. Our great-great-grandparents' Cadillac was not a wannabe BMW or Mercedes. It was the Rolls-Royce of America. They introduced the V8 to the automobile. They then invented the crossplane V8. Then they invented the V16. They had power windows in the 40s. They invented auto-dimming headlights. Cadillac was the brand that all the customers wanted and every other brand wanted to be. Over the following decades, the idea of what the automobile looked like was rapidly evolving. The Great Depression sort of marked a stump in the road for these ultra high-end luxury brands, but soon enough the greatest generation will be coming back from war and stimulating the economy into an era that we might not ever witness again. So Cadillac is back and better. They survived the 30s by introducing a mid-range model to the professional class, and I shit you not, allowing black people to buy their cars, which is low-key why your stereotypical unk still drives a Caddy to this day. And Cadillac really was a status symbol amongst everyone. Politicians, executives, and celebrities all had them. Cadillac didn't just embody, but they created the idea of large displacement, big American luxury on wheels. Cadillac didn't become luxury by following the trends of current luxury manufacturers. They became luxury by inventing it and then consistently over-delivering. They did this through continued innovation, quality, comfort, and presence. Fast forward nearly 100 years and somehow the company that set the standard for American luxury is selling reskinned Buick Enclaves? We're gonna get there, but not before I tell you about the first time that Cadillac went to Le Mans. Not this time, not even this time, but this time. Right after the war, Cadillac had this model called the Series 62. My uncle actually had one. I've talked about it a few times on the channel. It wasn't the most luxurious model of the time. That was the Series 75, but the Series 62 was a more luxurious version of the 61. It was still a big luxury cruiser that brought some of that pre-war opulence into the new era, and that somehow is what they took to Le Mans. If you find this story interesting, enjoy tales of motorsport and automotive engineering, or have a curious mind in general, then I think you'll enjoy the book. Yes, the book. How to Rebuild Civilization by Hungry Minds. Cadillac's history goes back as far as the dawn of the American automobile as we know it, but the book goes back even further. It has a few pages on early steam and combustion engines and more of the coolest inventions, techniques, and discoveries throughout history. It introduces rare knowledge from many generations ago that feel like a forgotten language these days in a way that sparks imagination and wonder. It's more than just a history book or a science book. It puts the past into context through digestible yet informative text, accompanied by beautifully illustrated, awe-inspiring art. Flipping through the pages, you'll find passages about the kind of early human creativity and ingenuity that walked so the modern world could run. It's like a love letter to human progress. If you're like me and you like expanding your knowledge and learning new information in an entertaining manner, it's a perfect scratch for the left and right side of the brain, with over 400 pages about 180 different topics across 23 different chapters. Bound in a pretty large coffee table sized hardback and beautifully printed on thick art quality paper. Like, this thing is actually pretty hefty. This is my high school AP Stats textbook. This is the book. Nice solid coffee table sized dimensions. I don't know if any of you guys had this book as a kid called The Dangerous Book for Boys, but it's like a grown-up version of that. Within the pages of the book lies a hidden quest that leads to a secret website which only 7 people have found. And that's not even it. There's this 18+ censored section that comes with these redacted pages about not quite the birds and the bees, but human inventions related to such. And I'm not even really gonna show that to the camera, to be honest, but if you wanna see these pages, plus everything that the book entails, you can go to the link in the description or use the QR code on screen to buy the book today. And you can add it to your bookshelf for 10% off if you use code Vinstagram10. Thanks to Hungry Minds for sponsoring today's video. Now let's continue on Cadillac's journey to Formula One. So Cadillac were planning to take the Series 61 to Le Mans. Well, not exactly. To draw a more modern comparison, a Cadillac Series 61 or 62 would be something like a Bentley Continental, an S-Class coupe, or even Cadillac's own El Mirage concept. Sure, they're nice, have decent power, but weren't exactly designed to break any lap records. Not to say that the Bentley Continental hasn't been to Le Mans, but these cars were built with a different purpose in mind. In fact, I would say that the idea of a Bentley Continental going to compete in such a series was nearly as ridiculous as the Series 61. The Series 61 was weighed down by a chassis designed for comfort and luxury, and it didn't stop American entrepreneur and race car driver Briggs Cunningham from taking the 3,800-pound Series 61 to Le Mans. Seeing my uncle's Series 62 in person and experiencing its handling characteristics firsthand just makes the idea of a big boat such as the Series 61 participating in Le Mans sound a bit ridiculous. And don't get me wrong, it is. I mean, they did it, but it looked ridiculous. And I promise you, these were not the same as your great-grandpa's Cadillac Series 61s that he picked up off the showroom floor. It wasn't exactly a Cadillac factory team, but Cunningham, along with Sam and Miles Collier, who founded ARCA, the precursor to the SCCA, and Phil Walters, a race car driver who eventually caught the attention of Enzo Ferrari, took the Cadillac Series 61 to Le Mans in 2 different forms. The one that did a much better job resembling the car it was made from, Petit Pato, meaning little clumsy in English, had a rather fitting nickname when you consider the fact that it was on the grid next to the likes of the Ferrari 166mm or a Jaguar XK120S. Not that it mattered, because the Ferraris didn't even make it to the finish line, and the Collier brothers put straight belt to ass on the Jaguar plus 90 more French and Englishmen for a 10th place finish. And coming up right behind them in 11th place was Briggs Cunningham and Phil Walters in something even more outlandish. This is what the French called Le Monstre. Yes, this is still a Cadillac Series 61, as confirmed by Le Mans officials, because they couldn't even believe what they were looking at was the same thing as the car that finished before it. What's crazier is that engine swaps weren't allowed, so when they tried to put a Ford V8 in the Series 61, they were denied. But changing the body entirely? Sure, why not? The new body was lower, skinnier, more aerodynamic, and made entirely of aluminum. Designed by engineer Howard Wyman of Grumman. Yes, Grumman as in Northrop Grumman, the defense contractor who had part in the creation of the F-35 and sells mail trucks to the United States Postal Service. Meanwhile, Cadillac continued to create American luxury icons for the streets that floated in and out of the cultural zeitgeist until they were nerfed yet again by worldwide economic conditions. The 1970s oil crisis and tightening expectations forced Detroit to downsize and rethink everything. Cadillac's big American luxury formula gets squeezed. Things like weight, displacement, fuel economy, emissions, and cost had to be much more carefully considered. Cadillac's company-wide downsizing did improve fuel economy over the behemoths that they succeeded. That part on paper is real. Cadillac was still the company that innovated and took risks to push the automobile forward. The thing about taking risks, though, is that you have to accept the idea that they are not guaranteed to pay off.
No other car offers it, foreign or domestic, only Cadillac. It's the exclusive new V8 fuel injection, the standard gasoline engine for all 1981 Cadillacs.
This resulted in weird tech experiments like the V8 which was the world's first electronic cylinder deactivation system. The problem being, ECU technology really wasn't where it needed to be to facilitate this, resulting in jerkiness, stalling. Dealerships would literally turn this system off, which canceled out the improved fuel economy but made the cars more reliable. The 80s became a reliability and reputation minefield, especially with engines like the HT4100, which has become infamous for its long list of issues. By the way, HT stood for high technology engine. That is just very American. You know Europeans had a field day with that. As GM began to downsize its lineup, Cadillac began to rely more and more on the GM parts bin, full of chassis and parts that weren't really designed for use in a luxury car. And this era matters because it breaks an unsaid understanding. If it's gonna be expensive, it can't feel cheap. If you're gonna be a luxury brand, you can't be compromised by hidden cost cutting. The entire meaning of luxury is that no sacrifices were made, that every component of the car was specifically designed for increased comfort and ease of use. Look, modern problems require modern solutions, but Cadillac's failure to find those solutions while still maintaining that lavish, old-world grandeur that they've been known for since before World War II in the same way that Rolls-Royce or Bentley were, eventually led them to become the neutered shell of a luxury marque that we knew in the 2000s. To give Cadillac the benefit of the doubt though, they did what they had to do to survive. They were the only company left of these ultra high-end pre-war luxury brands that made it through every crisis, every war, every economic downturn. So Cadillac of the 2000s was a survivor, but almost unrecognizable compared to the Cadillac of the 50s. But it was the beginning of a slow yet certain return to their former glory. In the 1990s, Cadillac tries to reassert itself with a flagship engine, Northstar. In theory, the Northstar V8 is the comeback. Advanced, powerful, high-tech, a far cry from the HT4100 or the V8 And to prove it, they put together a factory racing program surrounding the Northstar LMP, and at this time, officially involved themselves in the highest class of endurance racing at Le Mans. Now, normally when a race car finds success with an engine that ends up in street cars, the street car ends up being highly regarded and sought after. That's generally how motorsport technology trickles down into high-end street cars, then across the entire conglomerate, and why competing in motorsport is not only useful but often necessary for a luxury car company. The saying goes something like, with great risk comes great reward, but in the pursuit of great reward, we often forget that the downside of taking great risk is that you can absolutely lose it all. And that was certainly the case with the Northstar V8. The Audi R8 LMP was dominating this era of prototype endurance racing, which meant that there wasn't really much space at the top. And to be honest, it's not like Cadillac would have taken that top spot in the absence of Audi anyways. The Northstar LMP was largely unremarkable, and when the Northstar platform made its way into street cars like the C5 Corvette-based XLR, as well as the Seville, the STX, the DeVille, and a neutered 2000s rendition of the Eldorado, it was plagued with issues largely to do with its head gaskets. It was known for oil consumption issues, excessive camshaft wear, overheating, blown head gaskets, and arguably the worst of all, the head bolts would strip the threads in the block, basically rendering the entire engine useless unless you took the top end apart, if it was even worth repairing and rethreading. A failed attempt at a higher end engine platform for the new millennium, plus the continued reliance on a GM parts bin full of parts that were less than what was expected of a company previously known for extreme opulence, is what doomed Cadillac to playing it safe and being damned the pseudo luxury purgatory for the entirety of the 2000s and 2010s. And GM's platform sharing strategy wasn't inherently evil. Every automotive group shares parts. The issue is when the part sharing, especially the platform sharing, is so blatant that it collapses the brand illusion. The 2000s and 2010s saw Chevy Volts and Buick Enclaves with the Cadillac design language bastardized and stretched over their unsightly silhouettes. And it didn't really fool anyone who was shopping for an actual luxury vehicle, because luxury isn't just a logo. It's the idea that it doesn't require a logo for someone with a taste for finer things to know that this product is better than the rest. For example, a nice tailored Italian suit does not have Brioni logos printed all over it. The material quality, the shape, the sheen, the stitching, the way it drapes on one's shoulders, the way the pants aren't overly tight or too long and baggy, it speaks for itself. Something like a Cadillac XTS, which is really just a Chevy Impala underneath, is like putting fake Gucci logos all over an off-the-rack H&M suit that's a size too big. But you give Cadillac a few more years and they get sick of it. They used to be above the likes of Mercedes and BMW. By the end of the 10s, their fan base is reaching to even make that comparison. Then, quietly at first, Cadillac starts to make legitimately good modern luxury vehicles. Actual design confidence that doesn't remind you of a Chevrolet. Interiors with intention. Performance trims that feel like they were engineered by car guys, not focus grouped by accountants and the EPA. So throughout the early 20s, they swapped their old, unremarkable grandpa cars for cool new stuff that's actually luxurious, built on their own luxury-oriented platforms with a new revitalized design language that allows for more flexibility into the upper end of the market without looking like an old people car. And to get on pace with the industry's leading innovators, they do what all the leading innovators do to learn and develop new techniques in design. In 2023, Cadillac debuted the V-Series R at the Rolex 24 as the best sounding prototype on the grid. The V-Series R saw a podium finish on its first time around any track at the iconic Daytona Road Course, a podium finish at Le Mans, a victory at Sebring, a victory at Long Beach, a victory at Petit Le Mans. This car was good enough for smack dab in the middle of the FIA World Endurance Championship, but also good enough for an IMSA GTP Manufacturers Championship title. This proved that Cadillac was capable of competing at the highest level of motorsport, that they weren't just some random brand from pseudo luxury purgatory that was having its last hurrah before it faded back into obsolescence. In the meantime, rumors started to brew surrounding their future involvement abroad in what some would arguably consider an even higher caliber of motorsport.
Formula One in 2025 begins when the 5 red lights go out. The new season is underway.
Yeah, so Cadillac was supposed to be here. Cadillac's F1 story actually started publicly in January 2023, around the same time they were getting their prototype program off the ground, when GM and Andretti Global announced their plans to enter F1 under the Cadillac banner. So the process with the FIA moves forward, but there's a side to Formula One that doesn't quite want them, at least not yet. In early 2024, Formula One rejects Andretti's bid for 2025, basically arguing that the application didn't meet what F1 wanted in terms of value and competitiveness. So while the Formula One fan base was, in my opinion, unreasonably abrasive towards the idea of an American team, the FIA's biggest concern was the prospective team's brazen confidence in their ability to A, build a car to compete in the 2025 season under the current rules, then B, build another car to comply with the significantly changed 2026 rules over the course of 3 to 4 years leading up to it. On top of that, GM wanted to be an engine manufacturer, and they thought this was all possible within the next 4 years. Yeah, right, is what the FIA was thinking, as they claimed that the fact that they even thought this was possible gave them reason to question their understanding of the challenge at hand. And then comes one of the most ridiculous moments in modern motorsport politics. Andretti Global claims they weren't welcome in Formula One and haven't received any sort of correspondence from the FIA. Well, it turns out that they just weren't aware that the FIA had been invited them to a meeting because the email ended up in their spam folder. To be fair though, Cadillac was a bit too ambitious. Not only did they want to enter as a constructor, but GM wanted to enter as a power unit manufacturer. And it wasn't like American brands just never had a chance in Formula One. The Ford Cosworth DFV engine is the most successful Formula One engine to this day. Hell, the current Red Bull F1 team used to be owned by Ford. And funny enough, Ford once again is that team's current engine supplier. They got in with much less resistance, as I'm sure this was part of a much more long-term plan by a company who is much more familiar with the sport and has previous involvement and such. Plus, the underperforming yet somewhat American Ferrari Junior team, Haas F1, will have been on the grid for 10 years this year. So while I, along with the rest of the American F1 fans, sense some degree of condescendence from the FIA, especially when Cadillac F1 is backed by the most successful American F1 driver to ever do it, and a conglomerate that's probably more capable than really anyone else to enter such an expensive sport, I don't think it's quite fair to act like they just went, ooh, big goldy American car, ugly and big and not posh and not good look for F1. And so the structure evolves. Cadillac lowers their expectations, pushes their timeline back a bit, and by early 2025, Cadillac's entry gets final approval, with backing that includes TWG Motorsports and General Motors, which means that Cadillac is officially set to join the grid for the 2026 season. Also, the FIA approved GM Performance Power Units as an engine manufacturer, not for now, but for 2029, with Cadillac using Ferrari power units in the meantime. This setback allowed Cadillac to not have to design a car for 2025, then to have to scrap that and design a new one for 2026. They just decided to wait for the 2026 rule change and spend the entire 4-year period designing their first Formula One car around the new formula. And we just witnessed this official livery for the first time. Finally, an American team, and it's not running someone else's chassis. It's Cadillac's very own Formula One car, and the livery is sick, by the way. Arguably the best one on the grid, and that's how you gotta come when it's your first year in F1. And by the time GM becomes a power unit supplier, it's rumored that V8s might make a comeback. Or at least they'll be shifting from a 50-50 hybrid power split to a 90-10 power split in favor of the engine. The cars will sound louder, sound better, and be justified through the use of sustainable fuels. That way they can continue to choose the least logistically efficient and least environmentally friendly race schedule just for the love of the game. But honestly, whatever it takes to ditch these current turbo V6s. This way, GM won't even have to deal with this nonsense. They can just get straight to doing what they do best. Loud ass, hopefully naturally aspirated V8s. What, are they gonna be push rod too? It'll be the most American thing that Formula One has seen since Zach Brown. So yeah, Cadillac is in there, and that's how it happened.